Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today we've got a truly fascinating source document to unpack. We are taking a deep dive into Todd and Julia Reinhardt's highly provocative philosophical text, The Life You Want is Not Something to Apologize For. As your impartial guide, my goal today is to lay out the author's core arguments about what they call rational self-interest. We're going to get a clear, structured look at a framework that challenges some deeply hardwired societal assumptions. So let's jump right in.
Must you choose between self-sacrifice and exploiting others? Think about that for a second. The authors point out that this is arguably one of the most persistent, widespread mistakes in moral thinking today. We're constantly presented with this binary choice, right? It's like either you sacrifice yourself, your ambitions, and your wealth to other people, or you become this ruthless predator who sacrifices other people for your own gain. It honestly feels like a trap.
But the text pushes back on this hard, and I mean really hard. That is a false choice. Todd and Julia Reinhardt argue that we are absolutely not locked into choosing between being a martyr or being a predator. Instead, they introduce a completely different pathway, a philosophy that is organized around the actual practical requirements of human flourishing.
To understand exactly how they build this argument, here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the false moral choice, move into defining rational self-interest, explore the role of reason, look at ambition and true happiness, examine relationships without sacrifice, and finally wrap things up with rejecting false guilt.
All right, hitting our first section, the false moral choice. Here, the text fundamentally dismantles the old traditional view that morality always equals sacrificing yourself.
Which brings us smoothly to section 2, defining rational self-interest. The authors argue that throwing the word rational into the mix literally changes everything about how we understand self-interest.
Let's look at their exact definition. Rational self-interest is living well through reason, character, productivity, judgment, and respecting equal rights without surrendering your life or exploiting others. Now, what's really wild about this definition is how demanding it actually is. It's a high bar. This philosophy gives absolutely zero permission for fraud, coercion, manipulation, or theft. It doesn't ask you to surrender your life to the demands of others, sure, but it also strictly forbids you from getting what you want by exploiting anyone else. This contrast really hits the nail on the head. Think about predatory selfishness. It just asks, what can I get away with right now? It's all about immediate acquisition without any principles. It's recklessness or betrayal for a quick reward that, honestly, ends up destroying you. But rational self-interest, it asks a much bigger question. What kind of life am I building? It's focused on long-term flourishing. Things like health, a solid reputation, and genuine security, those are built over time. These aren't just different flavors of selfishness. They are fundamentally opposite ways of living your life.
So how do we build that kind of life? Let's move to section 3, the role of reason. Because sustained, long-term happiness, it doesn't just happen by accident.
According to the source material, sustained happiness requires a specific method, and that method is reason. The text breaks this down into an active step-by-step sequence. You observe facts, you identify causes, you integrate evidence, and critically, this is huge, you refuse to substitute wishes for knowledge. Reason means looking outward at reality before you look inward at your feelings. Now, the authors note that your emotions are totally valid psychological data. They tell you what you value or what you fear, but they do not establish facts. You can passionately desire something that is actually completely toxic to you. Rationality requires the confidence to use your judgment and the intellectual honesty to correct it when reality proves you wrong. It's a hard rejection of treating unsupported feelings like they're somehow superior to actual evidence.
That emphasis on reason sets up our fourth section perfectly, ambition and true happiness. The Reinhardts deeply reframe how we should be viewing work, prosperity, and the very definition of a happy life.
The big takeaway here is that happiness, at least how the authors define it, is way more than just a string of temporary pleasures or distractions. Pleasure is great, but real happiness is a sustained, enduring condition produced by value-directed living. It requires productive achievement, physical health, love and friendship, financial stability, purpose and self-esteem, and independence. The authors argue that productive ambition is an absolute virtue. As long as it's directed by reason and integrity, there's no virtue in wasting your potential. Wanting substantial success or wanting to build wealth, that is not morally suspicious. The only real moral question is how you intend to get it. If it's earned through actual production, invention, and voluntary trade, rather than fraud or political favors, the authors argue a free society should be celebrating it.
Okay, but what about other people? Does this mean we just ignore everybody else? That brings us to section 5, relationships without sacrifice. A common assumption is that self-interest means living a cold, isolated, lonely life. The source document argues the exact opposite.
Listen to this incredibly resonant quote from the text. Love is admiration made personal. The authors explain that human flourishing is profoundly social. Other people matter immensely, not because they automatically own your life, but because they are immense values to you. You see qualities in someone, their character, their intelligence, their resilience, that matter deeply to the kind of life you want to live. And because of this, doing something difficult for someone you love is not a self-sacrifice. If you're staying awake all night beside a sick spouse or helping your kid through a major crisis, you are serving your own profound values. Real love, the text says, enlarges your life. It doesn't erase it.
To really get this, we have to look closely at how the authors define the word sacrifice. They state that a sacrifice, properly understood, is the surrender of a greater value for a lesser value, or a non-value. And man, that changes everything. Giving up a lesser value to protect something more important, that's not a sacrifice, that's just what they call rational prioritization. If you skip dessert because your long-term health matters more to you, you aren't being a martyr. If you skip a fun night out to help your partner through a tough situation because your marriage is your highest value, you haven't surrendered your life. You simply chose the greater value. Successful living literally requires this kind of intelligent hierarchy.
And this exact same principle applies to generosity. The text firmly asserts, need alone is not a blank check drawn against your life. Generosity is perfectly moral, according to the authors, when it is a voluntary expression of your values. If you help a friend or donate to a cause you genuinely care about, you're acting in rational self-interest. The problem only starts when generosity is converted from a voluntary choice into a mandatory moral debt imposed by force, coercion, or entitlement. Basically, someone else's hardship does not automatically give them ownership over your time, your labor, or your property.
That distinction between voluntary action and imposed obligation leads us right into our final section, rejecting false guilt. Here, the authors draw a sharp, clear boundary between taking real moral responsibility and just being controlled by others. Let's look at a very powerful distinction made in the text. We have proper guilt versus counterfeit guilt. Now, proper guilt has a legitimate purpose, right? If you lie to someone you value, act dishonestly, or betray your own core principles, guilt acts as an alarm. It alerts you to a real moral failure and pushes you to fix your behavior. But then there's counterfeit guilt. The authors warn that society can actually train you to feel guilty for your ambition, your success, your wealth, or even just for having personal boundaries. The text argues that this false guilt is one of the most effective instruments of control ever devised. Because think about it, if someone can convince you that your strengths somehow create debts to others or that your happiness is morally suspicious, you will start policing yourself on their behalf. The message here is clear. Proper guilt should correct wrongdoing, but false guilt, that should be firmly rejected. Which brings us to the core, incredibly empowering conclusion of the Reinhardt document. Your life is not a debt. Your existence is not just raw material that belongs to society, the state, or whatever collective is trying to claim moral authority over you. You do not owe your life as an apology. You are responsible for building the conditions of your own flourishing. The text argues that the moral purpose of your life is happiness, and you achieve that by using your mind, producing values, protecting your health, choosing people worthy of your love, and respecting the rights of others while absolutely demanding that your own rights be respected too. So I want to leave you with this final question to reflect on. Are you building a life based on rational self-interest, or are you sacrificing it to counterfeit guilt? The authors of this text are challenging us to stop apologizing for our productive ambitions and to realize that a genuinely good person doesn't need to be a sacrifice nor a predator. It's a profound shift in perspective. Thank you so much for joining me to explore these ideas today. I really hope the structured look at the text has sparked some deep thinking about how you approach your own life choices. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.